Hello, everyone. My name is Julie Garden Robinson, and I'm your host for today's Field to Fork webinar. These are brought to you by North Dakota State University Extension, and we extend a special welcome if you are joining us from a watch party. We are celebrating a milestone in 2025. This is the 10th year we have done the series, and we're so happy that you joined us today. We have reached thousands of people with information about growing, preparing, and preserving fruits and vegetables, along with best practices for food entrepreneurs. And we have archived all of the more than 100 webinars from the previous years, and the link is always on our Field to Fork webinar page. The next slide shows our upcoming webinars, and we hope you join us for these as well. We have about 5 left this year. The next slide shows the webinar controls. And because of our large number of participants, we invite you to post your questions and comments in the chat. So let's practice finding and using the chat box. Many of you know what I'm going to tell you next. Click to open the chat and then type your city and state and your current outdoor temperature. I know our special guest, Cindy, today is having some interesting weather conditions in Omaha. The next slide provides an acknowledgement. I do have a special request. This program is sponsored in part with grant funding from the USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service, and I will ask each one of you to complete the short online survey that will be emailed right after today's webinar. And as a thank you, we will continue to provide prizes to the lucky winners of the random drawings every week. So they went out today for last week. Be sure to put your complete address on the follow-up form, including your city, state, and zip code, because you're literally from all over. And also be sure to scroll down to today's date. Again, I welcome you to today's webinar, and I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, whom I've known for a long time. Cindy Brison is an extension educator at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and she is located in Douglas-Sarpy County Extension in Omaha. She teaches classes in food safety to the food service industry, childcare providers, school lunch employees, as well as to many consumers. She also works with the cottage food industry in Nebraska. She is a member of our North Central Food Safety Extension Network. So thank you for being here today, Cindy, and it's all yours.
All right, thank you for inviting me. As Julie said, I don't want any of you to be concerned. We're having a blizzard right now. We've had thunder snow today. Yesterday it was 80, and then we had hail, and then we have thunder snow, and now the lights go on and off about every 5 minutes. So the computer, I think, is safe, but if you see the lights flicker behind me, don't worry about it. Today I'm here to talk about pickling, just pickling in general. A lot of the things I'm going to talk about, I'm hoping will dispel some questions you may have or some things you might have heard. It's very important as we talk about food preservation that we do it correctly so nobody gets sick. The history of pickling is kind of interesting. Things have been pickled for a long time. It's definitely a food preservation technique, and it dates back thousands of years. So, through research and science, it's changed, obviously, from the first thing that somebody pickled until today. So we keep doing research, and we keep updating some of the findings that we've had and change. We talk about some of the changes that have happened over the years. And there's lots of things you can pickle, not just fruits and vegetables, but people pickle protein items like fish, meats, and eggs, all different sorts of things. So what can you pickle? Of course, you can pickle pickles. So you can pickle cucumbers. If you go into schools and ask kids where pickles come from, they get a blank look on their face. Most people don't know, or most kids don't know that pickles come from cucumbers. When you're pickling with cucumbers, you want pickling cucumbers. You want something that has a little thicker skin and not so many seeds. They make better pickles. If you use non-pickling varieties, then they're not going to hold up as well, and you're gonna have some pickles that you probably don't appreciate. Lots of produce can be pickled. You can make relishes, you can make pickle relish, you can make chow chow, you can pickle eggs, you can make chutneys with all different sorts of things in them. So there's lots and lots of things that you can pickle. So when you're pickling, there are some basic ingredients you use. The first thing obviously is what's the item you're going to pickle? Are you going to pickle a watermelon rind? Are you going to pickle a cucumber? What are you going to pickle? So for purposes of this presentation, I'm going to talk about pickling pickles. So your produce, obviously, when you pickle it, it provides something for you to eat. It provides a flavor. There's a certain texture to things that are pickled. So when you're pickling items, if you're picking produce from your garden, they recommend that you pick it in the morning, that it's firm, that it's not too big. You want to make sure if you're using pickling cucumbers, they never get any bigger than about 2 inches around, because if they're too big, they're not going to pickle correctly. You want to make sure any produce that you use is free from spoilage. It doesn't have any nicks or dents. There's no bugs, nothing that you want to cut pieces off of because it's been damaged in the garden. Once you pick something from your garden, you want to pickle it within 24 hours. If you can't do that, you want to put it in the refrigerator because you want your produce to be as fresh as possible. If you go to your local farmer's market or you go to the grocery store to buy pickling cucumbers, then again, you want to pickle them as soon as possible. Before you start pickling, you're going to want to make sure that your area is clean, your hands are washed, and that you wash your produce with cool running water before you pickle. When you're looking at pickling recipes, a lot of times it'll give you weights and it'll also give you measures. Weighing pickles is probably the most accurate way to get enough produce, but a lot of times your recipe will also say 2 cups. We talk about vinegar. Vinegar is super important when you're pickling. This is one of those things that we have to be very, very specific about. So not only does it provide taste, but it prevents spoilage for your pickled product. It decreases your chances of bacterial growth. When you're pickling, you must use 5% acidic vinegar. There are different vinegars on the market, so please check. A lot of them say right on the front 5% acidic, but just make sure that the one you're picking is 5%. You can use white distilled vinegar or cider vinegar. You never want to dilute your vinegar with water or anything else because then you're increasing the chances of bacterial growth. We do not recommend you make your own homemade vinegar because the acidity level is not the same and it's not going to, again, prevent bacterial growth. Vinegars reduce the pH to a level that prevents the growth of bacteria that causes botulism. I read that specifically because that's what we're trying to avoid. When we do canned goods, anything that we get out of the garden, anything that grows in the ground could possibly cause botulism. So that's what we really, really want to prevent. Salt is one of those things that provides taste and again helps prevent spoilage. You should really use canning or pickling salt. And I know people say, well, I don't want to purchase one more type of salt. But if you use table salt, because it contains iodine, it makes your pickle brine cloudy. And if you don't mind that, then that's fine. But canning or pickling salt is going to be your best bet. When you're fermenting pickles or anything else, it's important when you're using salt that you would avoid using the reduced sodium products because they're not going to allow for the proper fermentation. And make sure that you follow the amounts. When you're measuring everything for your recipe, it needs to be accurate. This is pretty serious because it's going to help so your product turns out the best, but it's also going to help prevent spoilage. You don't want to pick a recipe and decide you want to make it low sodium and leave the salt out. All right. That salt is in there again to deter bacterial growth. There are some recipes that, like fresh pickles, that can be prepared with little or no salt, but that's based on a research-based recipe. Don't create your own recipe. Some recipes call for sugar. Not only does it contribute to taste, but it also kind of plumps up your pickles. It's not in all pickle recipes. You could use white sugar or brown sugar. Using brown sugar is definitely going to change the color of your brine, and it's going to give it a little different flavor. You're going to add water in your recipe. You add the amount that the recipe calls for. It covers the pickles in brine while diluting the intense flavor of the vinegar in a safe manner based on a research-based recipe. Your water affects your firmness. We always recommend that you use soft water because that's going to keep your pickle crisp. If you're using hard water, then it might cause your pickles to change colors or become softer. There's a lot of spices we use when we pickle. They contribute taste and flavor. Fresh whole spices are obviously the best, but you can use powdered spices. When you use things like powdered dill or other things, it might change the color of your brine. So just know that up front. You want to follow the directions for adding spices. Some recipes will tell you add a teaspoon of, or add a sprig of dill, or add a teaspoon of dried dill to every quart jar. Or it might say put spices wrapped in a cheesecloth in brine, and then you would cook it that way and then pour it over your pickles. So follow the recipe, whatever it states. I'm a firm believer in garlic. I love garlic. I put way too much in everything I make because I like it, but this is not a time where I would do that. When you're adding garlic to pickles, add the exact amount the recipe calls for, no more, no less. You can substitute 1 tablespoon of dill seed for a dill head. And sometimes we don't always have dill, so if you need to use dill seed, that's fine. We get a lot of questions in Extension about making your pickles as crisp as the ones you buy in the grocery store. Well, for many, many reasons, your pickles are probably never going to be as crisp as they are in the grocery store because they have lots of different chemicals that they use and lots of different preservatives, and they're able to use quick heat methods to pickle things and to preserve them that we can't do at home. So just know there are some things we can do, though, to make sure that our pickles are as crisp as possible. One of them is pickling lime. Um, pickling lime Pickling lime comes with a lot of do's and don'ts. So there's a um, link at the bottom of this page it's very important. It's from the National Center for Home Food Preservation. So pickling lime, they recommend you only use food grade lime in when you soak them initially. Measure it perfectly. Don't use too much because too much can really cause problems. And then after that, after you use pickling lime in the first soak, they recommend that you rinse them at least 3 more times in order to get the lime off the pickles so you don't get sick. When you're pickling or when you're using pickling lime, they recommend you do not soak your pickles and your lime in aluminum containers because it will react with the aluminum and it will take the finish off the aluminum pan you're using, and the aluminum will be leached out and could make you ill. And again, make sure you're rinsing them at least 3 times and follow the research-based recipe. Calcium chloride is another item you can use to have crisp pickles. You might see those as Ball or Mrs. Wages, packages in the grocery store. I am not recommending either one of them. We are not. I'm not promoting them. I'm just saying that these are items that you could use. If you do use one of these types of pickling to keep your pickles crisp, then you'd really want to follow the directions on the package. Most of the time on the outside of the package, it says you add a small amount to each jar before sealing. So follow the directions on the package and you should be fine. And make sure that your calcium chloride, whatever you're buying from whichever place, Ball Canning or Mrs. Wages, that it's not expired. Grape leaves are something that we get a lot of questions about. Grape leaves contain tannins, and they decrease the enzyme that actually makes pickles soft. But cutting the 1/16 of the blossom end off of your pickle, which is what we always recommend, has the exact same effect. So you don't necessarily need grape leaves. They really don't make a big difference. Alum is one of those things that's no longer recommended, and I know we still get questions about that. With alum, it can cause nausea and digestive distress, and that's not something you want after going through all the trouble of making pickles. Other recommendations when you're pickling to make your life easier, because if you go through all the trouble and all the time and all the money of pickling and growing a garden or purchasing pickles or purchasing cucumbers, you really want them to turn out. So again, remove about 1/16 of the blossom end of the cucumber so it doesn't release enzymes that softens your pickles. So your pickles, it'll help them be crisper. Again, use soft water, that's the best. It will help again with crispness. One of the things that they recommend, which I thought was really interesting, is refrigerate your pickles. So take your quart jar of pickles or your pint jar of pickles and refrigerate them before you open them. After they're ready, stick them in the refrigerator overnight, and they're supposed to help with crispness by having them in the fridge. Now, there's a different type of canning method for pickling besides hot water bath. One of them is called pasteurization. It's where you process your pickles for 30 minutes in water at 180 degrees. And a lot of people have very good success with this. It's very important though. It prevents spoilage, but the water temperature should not fall below 180 degrees during that entire 30 minutes. So you need to use a thermometer to make sure that the water stays at 180 degrees that entire 30 minutes. So pasteurization is a potential of something you can use, but again, be very careful. One of the things that no matter what you do in food preservation, I can't state enough that you need to use up-to-date research-based recipes. I know my mom canned all of my life. I can't remember a time she didn't can. And I'm sure that probably some of the recipes early on were things that her mom taught her or somebody gave her. It's one of those things, they might have been safe enough at the time, but things have changed. And I use the example of when we can tomatoes now, it is recommended that you put lemon juice in your jars with tomatoes because tomatoes are not as acidic anymore. Things have changed. So new research has been done. New research is done every year all over the United States where we find new things with new recipes. I know Pinterest and all those fun places that have all these cool things you can do. Last year it was wine jelly was very popular. A lot of these things haven't been researched. Yeah, you can do them. Yeah, you didn't get sick. I'm really glad, but that doesn't mean you might not. So where do we recommend people find their recipes? Get them from places that have done the research. The National Center for Home Food Preservation has a ton of recipes. You can find something there. What's nice about the National Center is, the directions are there, the science behind it. So give them, check that out. Ball canning is an area. They have the Ball Blue Book. I'm sure lots of people are very familiar with. Lots of recipes. They update that about every other year. If you get on any extension office webpage, they're going to have research-based recipes on there too, things that you can trust. So when you find a recipe from a research-based site and not not off the internet, make sure you're checking your references if you find one. You need to follow the recipe. It's one of those things where you need to follow the ingredients carefully. It's not like making a casserole where you can put in an extra teaspoon of this or an extra teaspoon of that. You need to follow the recipe, measure everything out very, very carefully. Make sure the size of your pieces influence how the heat is going to get through your jar. And so if you like stir frying, all your pieces should be the same so they cook evenly. The same thing when you're pickling. The sizes of your produce should be all the same. So if you're doing carrots or cucumbers or whatever you're doing, all the pieces should be the same. You shouldn't have 3-inch thick pieces and then 2-inch long pieces. So make sure that your pieces are all the same. So when you put it in the hot water bath, the heat is going to get through all the pieces evenly. You want to make sure you are using the correct processing method and the correct processing time. Those are determined research-based in a lab. They check for pH, they check for water activity, they use a thermometer internally in the jar as they're canning it to make sure that the heat has penetrated clear to the middle and the bottom. When you're processing, you need to know what are your altitudes. In Omaha, we're 1,100 feet above sea level. As we go across our state to the other end of Nebraska, they're almost 6,000 feet above sea level. So the amount of time we would have to process something in Omaha is going to be different than the amount of time somebody might be processing something in Scottsbluff. So you need to know your altitude and you need to adjust the time based on that. I have to add 5 minutes to mine because I am 1,100 feet above sea level. And your recipe will tell you if you are this many feet above sea level, how to adjust the time for that. And it's very important. Make sure that you know there's actually a website that you can type into a search on any web browser and say, what's the altitude of my city? And it'll bring it up for you. And then you can write it down. I'm not going to talk a ton about fermentation. There will be another presentation in the near future about fermentation. So I'm talking a little bit about the two types of pickles briefly. One of them is brined or fermented. So these are the ones you would put in a crock. You would put them in a crock for about 3 to 4 weeks. You would weigh them down so they stay under the liquid. Maybe you use a plate. Maybe you use a pickling weight. They can be stored in that container for 4 to 6 months in the fridge after they have been fermented, but you need to get in there regularly and remove any scum or any mold that might be on the top. Or you can process them in jars so they are shelf stable for at least a year. Quick pickles are a lot of times what people really like to do because they are quick, they're unfermented. You pack them in the jars, you add the brine, and then you process them. And then, much like brine pickles, you need to store them on a shelf for 4 to 5 weeks before you consume them so they develop that complete flavor. So, your pickles didn't come out. Well, what went wrong? It's not always your fault. Hollow pickles. So hollow pickles can be a problem. You might have picked your cucumbers on Monday and then something happened and then you didn't get to pickle them until Friday or Saturday. Well, then they start to deteriorate, they start to get old, and that might cause them to be hollow on the inside. So again, we recommend that you harvest and pickle your pickles as soon as possible. And if you can't get them pickled the same day that you harvest them, you should refrigerate them. Um, Pickles sometimes have problems growing because of the weather, because of the soil, because of the whatever is going on, and they didn't develop quite right. So you might put them in your jars, and you might have hollow pickles, and they float. Okay, not necessarily a bad thing. It's probably not something you're going to take to the state fair. If you're fermenting pickles or doing crock pickles, maybe they weren't cured correctly. That would cause them to be hollow. If you use too big of pickles, so like I said before, no cucumbers over 2 inches wide, because if they're too big, then they're going to they're not going to heat process correctly, and you're going to have some problems with them being hollow in the middle, and the pickling solution doesn't necessarily penetrate all the way. So definitely don't use pickles that are huge. You don't want in the grocery store, they show you those huge pickles. We don't want to use those huge pickles. At home, we want to use small pickling pickles, no more than 2 inches around. Shriveled pickles. This can be a problem if you've done some inaccurate measurements. If you've used too much salt, too much sugar, or too much vinegar at the beginning of the pickling process, that can cause them to shrivel up, especially the salt. It draws the water out and it causes them to shrivel. You don't want to do that. Again, measure your ingredients accurately. Whole or too large pickles again could shrivel and be hollow. That would be not nice. So, again, make sure that you're using the right size pickles. Overcooking, overprocessing, or old cucumbers could also shrivel too. So you want to be accurate with the time that they're in the water. You want to be accurate with the hot water bath, the time that you're using, and the altitude and everything. And again, dry weather, really, really hot dry weather can cause pickles or can cause cucumbers to shrivel once you pickle them. Soft pickles. This is probably one of the biggest complaints we get when people call, my pickles are soft. Well, do they taste okay though? So if you're using old cucumbers, they could definitely be soft. Excuse me. They recommend, like any other produce that you pick in the first part of the day before it gets hot. They recommend that you pick your produce right after the dew is gone because that's when things have their most intense flavor too. If you pick cucumbers on a day like yesterday, it was 82 degrees here. If you pick them in the afternoon in the full summer sun, then they're not going to be quite as full and quite as tasteful, and so that's going to cause you some problems and have soft pickles. One of the problems with soft that can cause soft pickles is not washing your cucumbers well. It's important you wash your cucumbers with cool running water. If they're dirty, use a soft brush, especially around the stem, because around the stem where it's connected to the plant, it can grow bacteria and cause you to have a soft pickle. Removing the blossom end also is going to eliminate any enzymes that would cause the pickle to be soft. So remember to remove the blossom end, and not very much, just a tad bit. 1/16 of an inch is not very much. You can soak them in ice water 4 to 5 hours before you pickle them. That's going to help with the pickles being crisper when you actually do go to pickle them. Some safety tips we talk about with pickling, no matter what you're pickling. We get questions all the time. Can I pickle in my dishwasher? Can I pickle them? Can I can them in my oven? Can I put them in my multi-cooker? My favorite was, can I stick them in my bathtub and pour hot water over them? Can I open kettle? So no, you cannot can in your oven. Yes, you can turn it to a certain temperature, but that does not, when you put it in the oven, it's not going to push the air out of the jar. Yeah, it'll melt the seal and the seal will stick, but it's not going to push the air out of the jar and have it be a safe environment for you to be shelf stable. No, I know a lot of multi-cookers say you can in this. Yeah, it's not a stable temperature. It's not something that we recommend. It's not the safest thing to use. You can't verify that it has gotten hot enough over a period of time for a long enough period of time to be safe. Obviously, don't put anything in your bathtub. Don't put anything in your dishwasher. Open kettle. Some people do this. Many people do this. They take a hot jar, they put the pickles or they put the cucumbers in, they pour a hot brine over it, and then they turn it upside down once the seal is on. And then it does seal because you've melted the seal. But it's one of those things, they're not going to stay sealed. Again, you haven't pushed the oxygen out, so you didn't create a safe environment to decrease the chances of botulism. So don't do that. Use good sanitation practices. Make sure that your canner is clean. Make sure that your seals are clean. And in your rings, a lot of people will use rings over and over again, which is fine. Make sure they're not rusty. You want to make sure that every place that you use when you're preparing your pickles is clean and is sanitary. You wash your hands. One of the things that we recommend, I'm looking up, is that you turn off your ceiling fan when you're canning, because I know it's hot and that's exactly why you have your ceiling fan on. But if you have pets in your house, the ceiling fan is circulating pet hair, and you don't want that to get into your pickles. You don't want to overcook your brine. That will change the acid level, and then it's not going to create, again, a safe environment for your pickles. So you want to make sure that you're not overcooking it. Follow the directions on the recipe. One of the questions we get periodically is, how long do canned goods last? If you do home canning at home, we usually recommend a year to a year and a half tops. Some people will be cleaning out grandma's house and say, I found pickles from 10 years ago and they look great. They might look great, but we don't know if there's gotten any oxygen in there, if there's any bacteria in there. It's best that you just get rid of them. You want to, once you get, this was something that happened during the pandemic. People were doing a lot of canning who'd never canned before, and they stored all their jars with their rings on it. Well, if something happened to have gone wrong while you were canning, those lids are going to make you think that that seal is still on there even though it popped. So it's best to store your jars with the rings off so you can tell if a seal has come off or not. In some cases, especially with tomatoes, if people had canned tomatoes inappropriately, a lot of pressure built up inside the jar and they had the rings on, and then the jars exploded and it went up in the ceiling. So you don't want that to happen either. Make sure all the equipment you're used, as far as your canner, as far as your jars, as far as the thing that you pick your jars up with, all that stuff should be clean. It should be sterilized. Make sure that it's stored in a sanitary manner. You want to make sure you're following the appropriate headspace in your jars. Too much or too little is unsafe. Too much, you're probably going to have your jars not sealed because it's going to push all the liquid outside. You're going to, not enough, you're not going to have liquid over your pickles, and then you're going to have some problems there too. So follow the headspace based on the recipe. Never alter the vinegar, the food, or the water proportions. Always follow the recipe. So there is a website that I have included on this page. This is Safe Changes and Substitutions to Tested Canning Recipes. So let's say you have a recipe from the National Center for Home Food Preservation and you want to know if you can change an ingredient. This is a wonderful, wonderful handout for you to, I have printed it off and it is in my kitchen along with my canning stuff. It's a wonderful handout for you to use to go back to and go, can I change that? Can I leave the garlic out completely? Can I do this? Can I do that? Can I add more spices? So this is a wonderful handout for you to utilize. Make sure your canning jars are in good shape. Before I start canning every year, when I pull out the jars I'm going to can with for the day, I always take each jar before I wash them and I run my finger around the top of the jar. Does it have any nicks? Does it have any spaces that maybe the jar didn't form right? Does it have any scratches on the inside? We recommend when you're getting the air out of your jar that you use a plastic fork, maybe, or not a plastic fork, a plastic knife. They make canning knives that you can put in there that are plastic that remove the air, but a throwaway plastic knife works the same. You don't want to use a metal knife or something metal because it could scrape the inside of the jar and that will leave a weak point in the jar and it could explode and you don't want that to happen. So, checking your jars from year to year when you use them to make sure, again, there's no nicks, there's no cracks, there's no anything on there. This is a point of contention. God rest my mom's soul. She always said mayonnaise jars were the best to can with, and the only jars she ever broke in the canner were regular canning jars. I'm here to tell you the only jars you can can with are certified canning jars. Don't use mayonnaise jars. Don't use old spaghetti jars, anything like that. Canning jars. They're made, most of them are made to go into the freezer. If you don't want to can with them, you can freeze with them. They're made to tolerate the heat in your canner or your pressure cook or pressure canner. So again, canning jars only. You want to make sure things are washed and sterilized if necessary and that you're removing the air bubbles. If you don't remove the air bubbles before you put the seal on and you put them in the canner, then that could leave too much air. It could affect the airspace. So you want to make sure that you're getting all the air bubbles out. So with fermentation, briefly, you can see I have put there's a handout from the National Center for Home Food Preservation on fermentation, and it has quite a bit. If you want to learn about fermentation, it really has some good information for you to look at on doing it and doing it safely and a lot of different recipes. So all fermentation is transferring raw ingredients into something that tastes really good. And in some cases that it enhances the nutritional value of it. So, we ferment sauerkraut and wine and beer and cheese and bread and kimchi, all those things we ferment. So that particular website will take you to an hour's worth of reading that's all very interesting. So if you want to know more about fermentation, I would say start at the National Center for Home Food Preservation, and I think you will get the information that you need. One of the things as as Julie said, I belong to the North Central Region Food Safety Extension Network, and we have a wonderful website. We also have information on canning, and we have a food preservation newsletter that goes out every other month. And this is the website where you can sign up for it, and it's always the most up-to-date information. During the pandemic, we talked about jar lids and which jar lids, since there was a shortage, what could you do? We've talked about steam canners. We've talked about anything that's the latest and greatest. So if you're interested, sign up for this newsletter and it will come to your email box. They're very good. They're very short. They're just a front and back of a piece of paper. So it's a quick read, but it's always going to keep you up to date on what's going on with food preservation. And they're written by food safety specialists, so you know that they're going to be accurate and they're good information that you can pass on. So I know that you will get this today or tomorrow. You'll get a copy of the slides, so it'll all be there for you to go ahead and utilize. And now I've opened it up to see if there are any questions.
And yes, you have a number of questions. You've covered some of them.
Okay.
But first I'll say that Cindy's PowerPoint handout is already linked on the Field to Fork website. So there's a lot of resources on that, including the link to her website. So somebody asked early on, and I believe you did cover it, but why do pickles get soft?
Oh, all those reasons. But probably the biggest one that possibly you can change is definitely hard water. That's one of the biggest problems with soft pickles, besides not handling them as soon as you harvest them, things like that. But hard water is a big issue.
So Cindy talked about using 5% acetic acid vinegar, and someone made the comment, I like 7% acetic acid vinegar. Are there any issues with that?
It's going to be more acidic, so it's going to kill bacteria. So it's one of those things. I'm curious to find out where you found 7% acidic vinegar. That's interesting. It should be fine. I would just double check to make sure on the back of it, it doesn't say anything about do not can with it, do not, because sometimes when vinegar gets to be so acidic, maybe that it's only used for cleaning purposes. So it would definitely be something I would read the label to see what it says.
5% is certainly safe.
Definitely.
Someone just posed a question about egg glassing, and I've had that question. Have you had that question, Cindy?
I have, but I'd be open to your answer.
I'm just the host today.
Um, Egg glassing. Um, so that's where you keep your eggs for a long, long time, right? Okay.
Yes, yes.
So I'm gonna, all right. So I'm gonna go back to my original statement. Just because people have done it for a long time and they haven't died doesn't mean it's a good practice. So, yes, people do glass their eggs and keep them for years. Is it a safe practice? No. Again, you think about it from the standpoint of nutrition. You have something that's over a year old that's been sitting in your fridge or on your counter, you're going to lose a lot of the nutritional value. You're going to lose the flavor. And I know glassing, people say, well, glassing the eggs, well, okay, you can still only when the chicken hatches the egg, when it comes out and it has that protective coating on it, you can still only let it sit out so long before the egg goes bad. So, if you're gonna glass eggs, I would recommend you not feed them to anybody that's older. I would recommend you not feed them to anybody that's under the age of 5. Only people eat them with only adults. Again, it wouldn't be a practice I would recommend.
Totally agree. And I just popped something into the chat for everybody. It's a piece from Utah State University Extension and talks about the non-safety of glassing eggs, basically. So if you want to
Okay.
check that out, do that. And then someone made a comment. When I was young and on the farm, we had grapevines. Talking about grape leaves takes me back to my youth when Grandma used to have us gather grape leaves for her. Just a
I'm
comment.
sure. I'm sure. And
Uh,
they probably made good pickles.
yes, I bet they did. A couple of questions have come in about different types of salt, like Celtic salt, Himalayan pink sea salt, other types of sea salt. Any comments on using those other salts?
Again, if you use something besides pickling salt, it's going to affect it's going to affect the color of your brine. It could affect, like when you start getting into Himalayan sea salt and it's pink, it's going to affect the taste of your pickles probably. You need to make sure that it is, truly salt and it's not something that's low, because a lot of times when you buy we call them frou-frou salts in our house because we use lots of different varieties. Sometimes that they don't have as much sodium in them. So you just need to make sure that you're truly buying a salt. And again, if you're not okay with having them make your brine cloudy, then that's cool.
And I did pop a resource into the chat for this question. The question was, have there been any university studies done on vacuum lid sealers? So
Oh
I
dear.
shared the link to University of Minnesota Extension, which is linked on our NCFSN webpage. So basically it says refrigerate those if you're going to vacuum seal.
Yes, yes. If you want to vacuum seal dried beans, great. Don't vacuum seal your canned goods.
All right, so couple questions about lids. Someone's cousin reuses their lids,
Okay.
and another person asked about the shelf life on lids.
Okay. So you should not reuse your lid because once the seal is sealed, and then the chances of it sealing again and staying sealed are not good. So use them once. They're one time. They're made to only be used once. There could be bacteria in the seal. There could be all different sorts of problems. So you don't want to reuse your lid. I know lids were at a premium for a long time. They're not so expensive anymore. If you use a lid on a dry jar that you're storing something in decorative and then you decide to can with it, that's fine. But again, just use it once, and then throw them away. You can save the ring, but don't save the seal. And what was the second part of that question?
Shelf life.
Shelf life. Look on the side of your box because that's going to tell you, if you bought them 10 years ago, then probably the rubber is starting. So 10 years ago, things have changed. Seals used to require that you heat them up. You warm them up so they would be ready when you put them on your jar. Now, any seal you purchase tells you not to heat them up and to use them the way they are because the type of rubber that they're using has changed.
Here's a question. Someone remembers recipes that called for putting the pickles or cucumbers with ice in the fridge
Yep.
before starting the process. Is this necessary?
It's not. Some people say it makes their pickles crisper, but it's not necessary.
Okay. Really interesting question next. So the question is about sous vide, which is a low temperature, long time cooking method that was invented by a French chef. Some background. Um, the actual question was, could sous vide be used to get the exact temperature for the recipes for pickling?
Interesting. So, pasteurization of pickles keeps the water at 180 degrees. I suppose you could use sous vide for that as long as you maintained 180 degrees for the 30 minutes. Interesting. That's a question I will refer you. I would say yes, but I'm not the queen of pickling. I would refer you to double check before you do that to contact the National Center for Home Food Preservation. On their website, they have a very, very simple form to fill out to ask a question. I would ask that to see if they've done some research on that.
And I'm going to pop into the chat real quick. I just quickly went to that center. They have a whole web page about low temperature pasteurization. So if you want to go back to that, if that was the question that you posed out there, check that out. Um, will high alkalinity in your water affect the pickles?
Could. It could, definitely. That's why they recommend that you use soft water. Some people use distilled water to can with. It just kind of depends. So, yes, it could affect the softness of your pickles.
Someone has asked for the link to the Field to Fork website. So I'm going to just pop that into the chat right now
Okay.
because this is where all of the handouts are posted along with the archive of the webinar. So we record all these and then we put them on this site. Okay, here's another pasteurization question. If you pasteurize, do you put the pickles in the jars or loose in the water?
Oh, that's a good question. In the jars. So you get them, you make sure the jars are washed, rinsed, and sanitized. You stick the pickles in the jar, you stick the hot brine in the jar, just as if you're going to put them in a boiling water canner, except you're pasteurizing them instead of a boiling water canner.
Cindy, do you have any background or experience with some of the reusable lids that they've come up with? One brand name is Tatler.
Yep. So I know Nancy has used my counterpart in my office has used Tatler lids and she's had good experience with them. I have not. And I think they're kind of expensive. They're really cute. Um, you know, I don't know if really cute counts. I think that as long as you're not buying a fly-by-night reusable lid, buy something that's been tested. Buy something that has had some research done, not there was a time, and I say this, there was a time when you could buy lids from overseas and buy 50 lids for $10. Well, four of them sealed and the rest of them didn't. So, just make sure you're getting your lids from a reputable, like Tatler's a reputable manufacturer. Just make sure you're getting them from someplace that's reputable and read the research on it. Read, what are the people usually write, like if you order on Amazon, there's always, what did the 2,500 people that bought them say? And if 2,400 say they stink and they don't seal, I probably wouldn't buy them.
And I don't have experience with those reusable. I just use the regular ones. So I had to look up what this was, this next piece, and I'm not going to pronounce it correctly. Solier.
I saw that. I don't know what
Yes.
that is.
Well, if the internet is correct, it isn't always correct. It stands for German pickled eggs. So I just popped in the chat again. The National Center has a lot of good advice on pickling eggs. And as far as I know, we do not have a way to can pickled eggs. You keep them
No,
in their fridge.
no.
You might be able to buy some of these in grocery stores, even people, almost, well, they're not cottage foods, but I've seen some sold. But as far as I know, I do not have something to give you so that you could can them. So keep them in your fridge. Would you go along with that, Cindy?
Oh, 100%.
All right.
100%.
So I learned a new word today. Are English style long slicer cucumbers suitable for bread and butter type pickles?
No, no, you'll have a mushy mess. No, they're wonderful in salads. They just don't because they're so thin and because of their skins being thinner, you're just going to you'll be very sad when you do it.
Right. Any comments on steam canners?
Um, I think if you follow the directions, I think they're great. There's only a certain amount you can only process for a certain amount of time in a steam canner, so make sure you're following the directions for the canner. Make sure you're following the directions on the recipe. It'll tell you straight up, if you have to have them in a hot water bath for longer than so many minutes, then you can't use a steam canner. So just follow the directions and you should be fine.
Right. And the last question that I'm seeing comes from someone who said they have seen recycled lids being sold in local stores
Oh.
and comments, I wouldn't think these would be safe.
I'm
What do you think?
I agree with you 10,000%. Yes. If you want to reuse, let's say, like if you have a jar of pasta, you're storing pasta in a canning jar and you have a seal on it and a ring, and you want to wash it and reuse it on something else, totally fine. Don't worry about it, but you only can with it once. And don't buy used lids. You don't know what kind of bacteria is in there. You don't know what's happened to it, and you'll be very sad because they probably won't seal.
All right. What's your favorite, best jar sterilization method?
Usually I wash them in hot soapy water and then I bring the hot water bath canner to a boil and put my jars in there before I use them. Or, it depends on what I'm making. The dishwasher is always good too, but the hot water bath, that's why they tell you to put your jars in there. So
Okay, and I think this might be the last one I see. When pickling peppers and okra, do you have to slice or pierce them, or can you leave them whole?
I would follow the recipe. I would guess, my best guess would be that since as long as they're small, like less than 2 inches around, they should be fine. But peppers have a pretty hard outside on them. So you might want to pierce it, put a hole in it, but I would follow the recipe. I know okra, you have to be very, very careful with okra. If you're going to pickle okra, you don't want it to grow any more than maybe 2 inches long because when it starts, the first time I ever grew okra, I let it grow till it was about a foot long. And then you could beat somebody to death with it. So small okra, just like pickles, small pickles, they're much nicer to pickle.
Here's a couple more have popped in. How should I safely dispose of old canned food? Is it safe to dump out and reuse the jar?
It is. Make sure you wash, rinse, and sterilize it. If I'm dumping out old jars, I don't put it on my compost pile because if I'm going to use the compost in my garden, in case something was wrong with what was in the jars, I usually put it in a zipper bag and then seal the bag so it also doesn't explode in my garbage can, and it doesn't hurt any wildlife or anything. That's how I do it. That's not necessarily how you have to do it, but that's how I do it.
And I think there might even be a method on the national website on how to sterilize. So that would be something to really dig into that website if you're listening in today.
I would watch your jars too. We get a lot of jars donated in our office from grandma or great grandma, and some of those older jars are very fragile. If you can see that the glass in the jar has started to sink and the top is thinner than the bottom, just use those to store things in. Don't can in them.
Good advice. Do you have a length of time that jars need to be in boiling water for sterilizing?
I think it's 10 minutes. That again, I would have to look up usually it says on the recipe, so I don't. How do you track how old your canned food is? That I can give you a cool idea about that. The person that I work with, Nancy, has a chart, and she has a chart. she has a chart with what food she has. When she uses up a jar, she crosses it off so she knows at any given time what she has, what year it's from. I write the date I canned my items right on the top, right on the seal. So I know that if I have spaghetti sauce downstairs yet, it's from last year. It has the date August 2024 on it, and so I know exactly how old it is.
Great ideas. And Nancy is very organized.
Yes, she is. Yes, she is.
And then I'm only seeing one more now.
Okay.
Does dishwasher soap leave a taste in the jars more than hand washing?
Sometimes, sometimes the rinse dryer, things like that might leave a flavor in the jar, but you can hand wash them too, and then just sterilize them in the water. So
One interesting thing, if any of you have looked online or in stores, they now have electric canners,
hmm.
boiling water bath canners, and many of those have a sterilizing jars function. So they kind of start with that. So they're quite smart nowadays, all of these devices.
We have because we do classes, we have a couple of electric canners, and they will even they'll you set them to cook for the product you're using, and then they even stop cooking and they say this is the 5 minutes you should take the lid off. So yeah, they're very nice, but they're very big, so
Mhm.
they're kind of pricey. So it's
Yeah.
whatever works for you.
Okay, got another question about frozen vegetables. You ready for a frozen vegetable
I am.
question?
That one I can answer, and you're not going to like my answer. So when we talk about food safety, we talk about safe food. Doesn't always equal quality of food. So frozen vegetables are safe in your freezer for, and this was told to me by a food scientist, 100 years. As long as they were safe going in, they'll be safe coming out. But after a year or two, they start to taste like the freezer. They get freezer burned, especially because we all have frost-free freezers now. What is a frost-free freezer? It warms up, it cools down every day, it cycles, so there's no big hunks of ice on the side of our freezer. So it's going to decrease the chances. After a year or two, your vegetables are either going to be really hard and really dry, or they're going to be really soft and really mushy and taste like yuck. So I think that there's a moratorium, but if you find something in the corner, yeah, give it a try. Maybe it's good in soup. I don't know.
Well, very good. Well, I'll bring us to a close. Thank you so much, Cindy, and I hope the weather gets better in Omaha. The internet hung in there pretty well, so that's good. Thanks to all of you for joining us today, and I hope you join us next week as well. So thanks again, Cindy.
Thank you.